This program is proudly brought to you by the Peel Dance Bar, corner of Peel and Wellington Streets, Collingwood.
McLean. This is blah blah blah, and you're on Channel 31 Melbourne and Bed TV. We're here at the Peel. It's a Monday night and we're not drinking right now, but we will be around for a drink later on, Tom. We're talking about a queer country this week. We're talking about migrants and refugees. We're not so much the lucky country of the 50s, but the increasingly queer perhaps country of the 2000s. With me, I've got Joseph Checuti. Have I pronounced your name correctly, Joseph?
That's good, that's all right.
You're being generous. Joseph is a barrister and solicitor with a special interest in gay and lesbian refugees and migrants. And we've got two token migrants. You're not refugees, are you?
No. I feel like a refugee
Drew
sometimes.
Dax and Kel, welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome to blah, blah, blah. We need a bit of local colour, local ethnic colour, so that's why you're here.
Yeah.
The question of refugees and migrants is often confused in Australians' minds. So, Joseph, what's the difference between a migrant and a refugee?
I think we'll start off with the issue of a refugee. A refugee basically is somebody who has a well-founded fear of persecution, and that persecution is for a conventional reason. And when I say for a conventional reason, I'm referring to the Convention for Refugees. It's basically, when we talk of reasons, there's several. Which we may include race and nationality, political opinion, religious opinion, or even membership of a group. Now, it is under the umbrella of membership of a group that a gay person or a lesbian may in fact apply to become a refugee. People realize, of course, that when the Refugee Convention was formulated, they did not really think of gay and lesbian people as having valid claims for refugee status. In fact,
when was that? When did that?
Well, that I think is
about start establishing itself.
I think from memory it's 48.
It's post-war. It's
yes,
post World War II.
I could be wrong, but I think it is 48. But with later interpretation, with later case law, it became very clear that gay persons and lesbians were to be included under the umbrella of a refugee. I said you need to have a well-founded fear of persecution. In other words, you basically have to believe that if you go back, you are going to face persecution, and that fear has to be objective. In other words, it can't be the result of, say, a mental illness or something like that. So what happens is this: when you make a claim for refugee status, the department looks at it, or the Refugee Review Tribunal. They decide whether you actually have a genuine fear of persecution, and then once they decide that, they go on and try and work out whether that fear is well founded.
The well-founded fear of persecution sounds like a pretty dread sort of prospect. What sort of countries would you expect that well-founded fear of persecution to be real?
Okay, well, to be real, for that fear to be real, I think a number of points have to be borne in mind. The fact that a country may make homosexual acts criminal does not of itself make you a refugee. For example, there was a time when homosexual acts were illegal in Tasmania, but no one would have seriously suggested.
We've got some Tasmanians here, I think. I don't know whether they feel persecuted or they felt persecuted. We'll have to leave that issue until another day, I guess. But that would mean that just because somebody is a homosexual or a lesbian or somebody who likes to dress up in dresses and it's illegal in another country, they can't be guaranteed of being a refugee here?
Exactly, it's not automatic.
Even though we would actually quite accept homosexual behaviour in most cases.
Yes,
in
yes.
most families.
Is
Drew?
this Australia's definition of a refugee, or perhaps the United Nations definition of a refugee?
No, it's a general sort of approach to the issue of refugee, because quite clearly you cannot rely on the person telling you that he or she is a refugee, because you would have too much of a subjective test. So there has to be an objective test. But the point I'm trying to make is the mere fact that homosexuality is illegal in a place does not automatically make you a refugee. Even, for example, you may apply for refugee status, say, from a particular country, and you're granted refugee status. And then somebody else from the same country may in fact apply and be denied refugee status. And it could well be because that second person has a number of contacts in the particular country, and there is no chance, no prospect of him or her being persecuted in the country. So in other words, it's the test is not rigid. Once a person has established refugee status from a particular country, that does not automatically guarantee that other people from the same country will be granted refugee status.
So it's actually it's a case-by-case basis,
Exactly.
rather than a general rule that every Afghani homosexual or lesbian that doesn't like to wear the full garb, they're not automatically they're not automatically allowed to be refugees here.
No, they're asylum seekers, and of course once the government at whatever level determines that they're refugee, then of course they are refugees. I mean, that's the issue of refugee, and I think the second question was about migrants, or the second part of the question was about migrant. Migrant basically is I mean, a refugee is also a migrant, but then there's the other sort of migrants who are not refugees, and that's where we, in terms of gay migration, we often refer to the interdependency provisions. That is, when it is...
Interdependency sounds like fun, but what does interdependency mean?
It basically means the same sort of thing as we have had recently in this state, domestic partnerships. In other words, if a person has a partner overseas and that happens to be of the same sex, then the Australian partner may in fact nominate, sponsor.
So if I go on a holiday and I find somebody, fall in love with them and hang around with them for a while, they can come back and be my interdependent partner?
Yes. Well, there has been provisions. I think these provisions were introduced in April 1991, and before then, however, there were provisions under the humanitarian visa. But basically, a person...
But how long would I have to hang out with this guy?
Well, I think for an interdependent relationship, there's a number of criteria that have to be satisfied.
It's not easy. I can't just sort of automatically hang out with him
no.
for a year or 2 years or 2 months.
Well, you can't just say hop off to any neighbouring country, pick up somebody, come in and claim that they're your partner. Basically, the minister has to be satisfied that the relationship is genuine, that it is there's a mutual commitment for a shared life, and that you've basically have lived together as a couple for a period of 12 months before the date of the application.
Okay.
So there is that requirement.
So you do have to hang out, you do have to sleep with somebody and live with them for 12 months at least.
Oh, unquestionably. And when we look at Australia, I think Australians tend to be very critical of their own government. I think we have probably some of the best provisions in the world. The United States has no such provisions. If I am not mistaken, the last time I looked at the English model, you're required to live together for 2 years. The problem with the interdependency provision, of course, is that a lot of the problems do arise because people get very bad advice, and they're also, on occasions, very badly represented, and that, I think, is the issue. And nowadays the process has become so difficult.
This is bad advice in Australia or bad advice elsewhere?
Well, it can be bad advice overseas or bad advice in Australia.
So it's essentially migrants are people who come here of their own volition. They've fallen in love with an Australian, or what about if they're both Taliban, and they decide they can't live in Afghanistan anymore because they've come out as Taliban lovers? Would they be recognised as refugees?
Well, no, one of the parties has to be an Australian citizen or an Australian permanent resident. That's for the interdependency provisions, of course, but if they are subject to refugees, to persecution in their own country, then they each can apply on the basis of being refugees.
I met a Taliban taxi driver recently, and he was absolutely gorgeous, but then he gave me a lecture about how Taliban were doing the right thing for women and homosexuals and the whole damn lot, and I thought, no, I think I want this taxi ride to finish very, very quickly.
Did he give you a free ride?
No, he didn't give me a free ride. Thanks, Drew. Now, Drew, you're not pure migrant, are you?
No, I'm a first generation.
First generation, but what was your experience? What have your experiences been coming from a non-purely white Anglo-Saxon Protestant background?
In the 70s, like I was living in the city, and then I moved to a country town. And the minute I got to that country town, and they realised that like my mother was German, I was a Nazi.
Well,
and I used to get chased around the school.
They were a little unusual.
Oh, I was chased around the school, like unbelievably, like you're a Nazi.
Well, chased around?
Yeah, well, you know, not chased as in chased.
You weren't goose stepping at the time.
I'm confused now, but yeah, no.
Were you kissing the boys?
Most certainly was I ostracised for my German heritage, absolutely.
Well, Carl, you've been in Australia for a little while now.
I landed
from your native Philippines.
88.
88?
Yeah, in Perth.
So you still remember what it was like being a kid back in your old country? But
I wasn't gay then, so...
You weren't, I guess, although you could always come out now.
Genetically, maybe you were.
What was your experience as somebody growing up?
Being the only Asian kid in the primary school?
You were the only Asian kid in
I
the
was
school?
for like a couple of years. It was like one Asian surrounded by white people.
So were the white people nice to you?
Yeah, they thought I was... They thought I couldn't understand. So they'd say words and I'd be like, I understand you, but I can't respond to it because I don't know words.
Oh, you didn't have English?
No. It took me... Oh, yeah,
Sesame Street? It's a good show.
Yeah. That's how I learnt the numbers.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, guys.
So they did actually treat you pretty well?
Yes and no. It was...
They treated you like you were stupid?
Yeah.
How old were you?
I was 10, turning 11.
11 years old, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, how did you get around that?
How? I don't know, I managed.
And was it different when you came out as a lesbian?
I didn't do it until after I left school, high school.
Right, okay, so it was pretty safe until then.
Yeah.
We're almost out here for this part of blah blah blah. We're talking about a queer country, refugees and migrants in Australia. And we'll be back in a moment on blah blah blah. Country, this is a queer show, this is Ben TV, this is blah blah blah, and you're on Channel 31 Melbourne and elsewhere from time to time. I'm Ralph McLean, I've got Joseph Checuti, Drew Dax, Kristen Walker and Cal with me, and we're talking about the experience and issues around gay, lesbian, bisexual and transgender migrants and refugees. And before the break, Joseph, you were talking about what you would need to do if you were going along to a barrister or a solicitor or a migration agent about becoming a permanent Australian. What is the difference between going to a lawyer and going to an immigration agent?
First of all, the Migration Act draws a distinction between the provision of migration assistance and migration legal assistance. Migration legal assistance can only be provided by lawyers, but migration assistance can be provided by people who are migration agents but not lawyers.
Now that sounds like a lawyer's answer, Joseph.
Well, it is, but I think the important thing is it's basically about preparing forms. You go to a migration agent as a rule.
Also, you only need a bureaucrat there.
Well, it's probably closer to a bureaucrat. You've got to understand that migration agents, basically, to become migration agents, they need about 20 hours of tuition, and they need to pass a small test at the end of it. Now, everybody knows that to become a lawyer involves a little bit more than that, and in any event, a lawyer who provides migration assistance also has to be registered as a migration
You get
agent.
20 hours of ethics training, don't you?
Well, I think even the migration law program was certainly far more onerous than the attendance.
So migration agents are people who essentially put their hands up and say, we'll help other people, usually from their own community, from their own...
No. There's people who actually do it for their, through their own community groups. But there's also people who charge, and I must add that the fees that are charged by migration agents are not necessarily any cheaper than those charged by solicitors. In fact, in my experience...
No, you're not biased just because you're a lawyer, are you?
No. I am making that quite clear, and I don't mind going on record, and I am going. You are going on record. And but it is quite. What I am saying...
What would a migration agent do that a lawyer does?
Well, I am a migration agent too, so I mean, because I have to be registered, but I think a migration agent cannot give you legal advice if you've got problems with the migration legislation. That's the bottom line.
So what does a migration agent do?
Well, they basically help you prepare forms, help you prepare your application, and that sort of thing. That was a way for the department to get some control on those people who are working out there, especially in the community, sometimes charging fees, and they basically were not registered. The situation is still the same.
So what sort of fees would they charge?
Well, I've heard of, migration agents who would be charging,
In the hundreds, in the thousands?
Oh, no. If you do a migration application and you do it properly, you are talking thousands of dollars. There's no question.
Okay. What justifies that cost?
Well, the cost depends very much on the services that are being provided. I think this is one of the difficulty that a client faces. They go to a lawyer or they go to a migration agent and they really don't know what sort of service is being provided. So you could have a situation where a lawyer is providing really excellent service and the fees are justified, but then there are even firms of solicitors, and I can say that my firm is not one of them, but there are firms of solicitors that in fact hire migration agents.
Okay.
And in fact you're being assisted by a migration agent, not a solicitor.
Even though you're paying lawyers' fees?
Exactly, and I think it's important for people who go to firms of solicitors to ask, look, am I going to be represented by a lawyer?
Yeah. Now, Kristen, it occurred to me in thinking about the issues for this program that we don't have any idea about how many gays, lesbians, bisexuals and transgenders are immigrating to Australia. Are we importing enough queer people?
Absolutely not. We need more, of course.
Not that we're recruiting.
We don't have a very clear idea, but one of the things about the interdependency visa is that the government can put a limit on the number of people it will let in through that visa category. It won't put a limit. It can't put a limit on heterosexual couples, but it can put a limit on our relationships.
But they don't have one currently?
Currently they don't. They have had one in the past.
Really? There's been a quota on puss and dykes coming into Australia?
I think in the 96, 97 year it was 400.
Really?
And they have a target at the moment rather than a quota. They say the target for the coming year is 500. But one can assume that if we got too far above that, they might decide to put a cap.
Really? Why would they put a cap?
Because, I mean, in a broader context, we have to acknowledge, I think, the government is very concerned about people coming to Australia. We're not really big on welcoming too many foreigners, particularly if they're from non-white countries.
We don't mind tourists.
We don't, but they'll go home again, or we want to make sure they go home again. And we don't mind heterosexuals who get married to Australians. They can come in without any limit, but...
But there is a limit on the number of overseas bent people who can use that interdependency visa, but not currently.
Not currently, but I think, that we just have to remember that the government can just decide at any moment. Tomorrow the minister could say...
Is it the minister or is it a bureaucrat or is it a combination of the two?
It's a combination. I mean, formally speaking, the decision is made by the minister, but there would be a lot of bureaucrats involved in the decision-making process.
Well, this year, in fact, I think they've approved around 370, about 100 interdependent partners from Victoria, and that is well under the target. So there hasn't been a year when the target has been a problem at this stage.
I think it's actually a bit scary having a target or a quota, but that's something that we've all learned today, I think.
But one of the reasons, of course, is because Australia has an international law duty to basically respect families and promote families, of course, and at this stage, gay partners are not regarded as family as such.
In international law terms?
And in the migration law. I mean, migration, in terms of the Migration Act, an interdependent partner is not a spouse.
What about disease? What about HIV? What about Hep C? What about other diseases?
And maybe even convictions.
Convictions, yes. We could get onto drugs as well. Let's just stay with health for the moment. If I fell in love with an HIV positive American, who knows, would I be able to import him? I've been with him for 12 months. I've been hanging out with him. Does his HIV status make a difference?
Well, I think we've got to realise that with virtually every kind of migration, there are public interest criteria that need to be satisfied, and also health criteria. Now, in terms
Sounds like you're going to say no, Joseph.
Oh, no. Well, I did say no.
But there is a health check.
There is a health
Yes,
check.
and if a person is HIV or has AIDS, then of course that's a matter for the minister to determine. And basically,
It's back to the minister again.
yes.
So again, this is this case law business. It's not a general rule. Each case is considered case by case.
Yes, because there's a number of factors that have to be balanced against each other. One of it, for example, is the cost that person will make on the Australian community.
Let's say he's healthy. I mean,
Well, he is healthy now, but he may not be healthy in 10 years' time. I mean, we've got to be quite realistic. I mean, a person may become a financial burden on society. But having said that, of course, that doesn't mean that an application should be rejected. The minister will also look at the nature of their relationship, how genuine it is, whether or not it's possible for them to live overseas, for example, if they can both live in England, and all these other factors. I think the minister so far has been taking a reasonable approach to these matters, but
so we love you, Phil, for a moment anyway.
But I think it would make it harder. I mean, you have to prove more of a compassionate reason to allow an HIV positive person to come into the country. It will make it a more difficult application, and I would say probably would be an application where you would want to get a lawyer involved from the beginning.
Kristen, would it be easier for me and this hypothetical American to go to some other country?
Well, certainly it wouldn't be easy to go to America, because America has absolutely no recognition of same-sex partners for immigration purposes. If the person that you're in love with is from England or Canada,
Well, I wouldn't actually say I was in love with him. I was just
all right,
hanging out.
you just want to spend a bit of time with him. You've spent your 12 months, but you would be able to go to all hypothetical realm. Would be able to go to Canada or England or most of the Scandinavian countries, but really that would then totally depend on the law of the country that you wanted to go to.
So Australia isn't bad in international terms. We are a bit of a God's own queer country in some senses.
We're pretty good, actually. We were certainly one of the first countries to allow same-sex partners to immigrate with, for an Australian to bring their partner into the country.
Okay, now we're running out of time. There are several sources of information. I guess there's stuff on the web. There's lawyers. There's migration agents listed in directories for gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender people, and there's the Gay Immigration Task Force and
Gay and Lesbian Immigration Task Force now.
Bisexual, transgender as well.
They don't get
And
mentioned.
their post office box is also listed in the directories. And this has been blah blah blah. We're just about out of here for this week. We'll be back next week. It'll still be springtime and it'll still be BED TV on Channel 31 Melbourne.
This program is proudly brought to you by the Peel Dance Bar, corner of Peel and Wellington Streets, Collingwood.